The cost of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Has gotten out of hand, but luckily today I have a list of budget decks to choose from that will not only save you money, but can actually compete with the meta today. What's up guys, and welcome back to another episode of Cards and Coffee. I'm glad you're here because I have a wide variety of decks at different price points for you to choose from, but also make sure you stick around to the end because I'm going to tell you which deck is the best bang for your buck, not only competitively, but financially as well. But first, if you haven't already, please go grab yourself a cup of coffee or something. That way you guys can sit down and tune in. Alright, so today I have a total of 6 different decks to choose from, again, all at different price points. I'm sure there's probably 20 different decks around the same price, but again, I just felt like these are the best ones going into this format. If there's a deck that I didn't mention today, make sure you comment down below to help other players out as well. Oh, and we're almost at 10k subscribers, so make sure you subscribe because that would mean a lot as well. But now, hopping into our first budget deck of the format, it's actually the cheapest one in this list, and of course it wouldn't be a budget list without it. Floowandereeze is a solid deck, not only at competing, but saving you money as well. You can see here it's about $62 for the main deck, and I don't have an extra deck down here right now because if I'm completely honest, the extra deck comes up maybe like 1 out of every 10 games. You definitely need an extra deck because you need stuff to banish with Prosperity, which by the way, this deck does include. The Rarity Collection gave us so many staples to work with at a good budget price. But if you're looking to save a buck and be able to compete at locals or regionals, I think this is a great option going forward. Plus, this deck has stuff like Dimensional Shifter and Harpy's Feather Storm, so it can be very annoying for some of the best decks in the format. Again, the extra deck isn't that relevant, so you could really just throw in 15 generic cheap cards in your extra deck, and then over time, if you really wanted to, you could start adding actual cards to your extra deck that you might need. Oh, and really quickly, before we move on to the next deck, I just wanted to show if you already have access to some staple cards, whether you have the Rarity Collection or maybe you've played a deck before this, once you cut all these staple cards that have been reprinted a bunch, you're looking at about $20 for the main deck as well. I'm not going to say $20 is all you need to play this deck, but technically it's not wrong, especially if you already have some other tech cards you could put in your deck. Whether it's M-Pen or Dimensional Shifter or Featherstorm, this deck can just shut down all the decks right now. So this deck really felt like the perfect one to start with. But now moving on to deck number 2, a very popular deck right now, it is the Fire King deck. This budget list only comes in at around $87, which is insane for a meta deck. Obviously, we don't have the Wanted package in this deck. Instead, we're running the Dogmaticas. The Diabellstar package is worth more than any of these decks that I'm going to show you today, so obviously that's off the table. But by running this Dogmatica package, not only does it save you a bunch of money, but the consistency and utility is there as well. There are some downsides. It does lock you out of the extra deck, so that's something to keep in mind. When it comes to going first, this deck can basically do what the non-budget version can do, but again, there's a reason the Wanted engine is so expensive. It does add to the ceiling of the deck, and of course the grind as well. But one thing to note about this deck that's really amazing is that this includes extra deck cards like Heat Soul and of course your Wolf, all the stuff you need for your Maximus. You also have a bunch of staple hand traps in here. You could even throw Prosperities in if you wanted to. But I think one of my favorite things about investing in this deck is that in the future, if you really wanted to, you could grow with this deck as well in time as you accumulate more cards or maybe get some support from your OTS. I could easily see this deck slowly getting more cards added to it, and for that reason, I definitely have to think this is one of the best options going forward. Now, the next deck I wanted to talk about is actually something I don't think a lot of people would think about. Rika's on Avalon is still extremely cheap to pick up. Sure, the deck just got hit on the ban list, but it can basically do the same thing it's always done. I'm sure you're gonna have to mess with some of the ratios in the extra deck. There's a bunch of room, so that's really not an issue. But for a deck around $109, I think you get one of the craziest combo decks in the format. So many people disrespect this deck, and now that it got hit on the ban list, people are gonna disrespect it even more. Whenever you can show up to a tournament with one of the new decks of the format, you have an advantage because people don't know what your cards do. Now, Rika's been around for a while, but for some reason, people still don't understand this deck. So if you want to save some money and you want some crazy first turn boards, make sure you pick up this deck because it's also getting some Aromage support in the future as well. Again, this deck isn't perfect because, well, no deck is, but I think it's a solid option at this price range. But if you're willing to invest a little bit more, another amazing option is the branded Chimera deck. I really enjoy playing this deck. It has a lot of options and room for tech cards. It's a solid mid-range option that have a bunch of 1 and 2 card combos. And again, you can see there's Super Polys, Valor, Ash, Imperm, Nib. There's so much room for non-engine, and that's what makes it so great. At around $135, it's a great price point to get in. You can see the main deck is just under $70, but the extra deck is about the same price. Most of the money comes from the King of the Phantom Beast, $20 for the pair. And of course, Guardian Chimera is $25. Ideally, you'd probably like 2, but again, we're trying to save money, and I think at least 1 is what you need. Also, technically, Garura is some money as well, so as you can see, these 4 cards make up most of the cost of the extra deck. But again, this deck is super solid and one of my favorites to play, so I definitely think you guys should test it out. Another great deck to choose from would be Unchained. I think this deck is really amazing. The only downside is it just got hit on the ban list, so it did lose some consistency. At around $158, you get an amazing meta contender. With Shavara going to 1, it definitely hurts the deck because you have to change your combo lines. But now more than ever, you have to focus on consistency, which is why cards like Prosperity is a must in this deck. Again, the main deck here is around $92, and that comes with like Ashes and Imperms and Prosperities. And this extra deck is sitting around $66, and that includes a Zeus, which is just under $20. So again, maybe you have some of these staples already from previous decks, and you can go ahead and check it out. This deck is going to cost you $94 if that's the case. I really do feel like this is one of the strongest decks in this list, but again, make sure you put in the time testing before you invest in this deck. But now for the last deck, it's the most expensive on the list. It's our Furniture Labyrinth deck. As you can see, it's right around the $200 mark, and this comes with 3 ofs of basically everything except for Arius. This card is around the $20-25 mark, but the one thing you're obligated to play 3 of is Big Welcome Labyrinth, which is sitting around $30 each. That's really just half the price of this deck right there. But again, this deck is so amazing, this format, not only having great matchups against a wide variety of the decks, but again, just like the Fire King deck, there is a lot of room to grow with it. And while this is the most expensive deck on this list to get into, I really feel like it's a solid competitor, and again, something that you can add and grow with as the format goes on. Right around the corner, we're going to be getting Transaction Rollback. Again, this card will probably be $40 to $60 each, so again, that's going to add up quick. But even if you can't get your hands on this card, the deck will function perfectly fine. But that's what I mean by growing with the deck. In time, if ever you save up more money, then obviously you can start investing in these cards. If I'm completely honest, the one thing that's expensive about this deck is the extra deck, which is why we're running something like our Dogmatica Punishment. What this does is it basically makes it to where now we're playing a bunch of punishment targets in the extra deck alongside a few Muckrakers. There's also some generic Fiends for removal, and again, Omega is just another punishment target. But the best cards for this extra deck is Chaos Angel and Typhon. Again, very expensive cards, and if you're playing 3 of each of them because of Extrab, your extra deck becomes almost $500. So again, this is one of those things where you can slowly pick those up or just not play them and run Dogmatica Punishment. Obviously, having access to those extra deck cards is very helpful right now, but when it comes to playing on a budget, I think you have to make some cuts, and by having your deck basically at full power but hindering the extra deck, I think you have a solid option when trying to save a buck. But please test all these decks out yourself before you invest. The last thing you want to do is spend your money on a deck and then not like it, and now you're wasting money that way. But what deck do I think is the best bang for your buck, not only price-wise, but longevity in the format as well? At just under $90 to get in and play this deck competitively, I think it's a solid budget option. But one thing I did not mention that I think is really amazing is obviously this deck is going to want to play Populous, and a cool thing about this Snake Eye engine is you don't need the Diabella Star package technically to play alongside it. Obviously it helps because it's another engine that gets you original Sinful Spoils, but in theory, if you wanted to save money for another $32, you can basically throw this Snake Eye package in, and then of course whatever the cost of a Populous is, that's also got to be factored in. Populous is usually a 2 of, so assuming it's the highest rarity at Secret Rare, I'm gonna guess it's between $30 and $60 each. But by simply picking up this Snake Eye engine and throwing in a Populous, not only do you get a higher ceiling Fire King deck, but you also didn't have to spend like $300 or $400 on a Diabella Star package. So again, this does add more money to the price of the deck, but this is what I mean by being able to grow with the deck. Obviously, you'd want to play something like Bonfire as well, but again, I'm assuming this card is going to be really expensive and you can get away with not running it. The sky's the limit with this deck, and there's a reason it's so popular right now. But that's going to wrap things up for today's video. Thanks again for tuning in. Please comment down below. Let me know, is there any other budget decks you think are great options for people to pick up? And also, let me know what's the budget deck you're playing right now. Once again, I really appreciate all the support, and here's hoping to see you on the next one. Peace.